Hello.
Hey, can you hear me? Well, it's the first time I'm using this on my phone. So.
Hello.
Hello,
Hi. Disha, can you hear me?
I can hear you. How
I'm good. I'm good. Whose iPhone? Who's this iPhone? Ash, can you hear me, bro?
Yeah, good. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Ash, can you post this link? Disha, you have the access to the page, right?
yes.
Can you post this link? It has a. Because Rimsha is muted still. I've unmuted him from my end.
Just give me 1 sec.
You need to be unmuted, T?
Yeah. So I had a chat with the guy, PTR, and we had a test call, and he will be joining at 9:30. So he says that first get everybody in, so get all the viewers in, and then he will join. So keep him waiting. Don't allow him in. That's what he was saying. So. Can I see your videos, guys, if it's possible?
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure how to post the link. It's not.
I mean, like, there's an eye icon on your screen, right? On the extreme left. Or I've sent you the link in the chat. Just post it on Facebook. All right. So we have we have Sir on it. Who's allowing them? Is this meeting open to everybody?
Yeah, I think so, T.
Yeah, sorry, this meeting's open to everyone. I think you should put a waiting room on just for now.
Yeah, you should put the waiting
Turn
room.
off your virtual background.
Oh yeah, sorry. Do you want to make me a co-host just for now so I can change the settings?
Yeah, yes, Shona. Can
And
you
then I
put the waiting room
leave
on
later? Yeah, so just if you go on participants, make me a co-host.
Okay. Yeah, I did it, Shonal. Shall I change the host? It's saying make Shonal the meeting host. Shall I do that?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, because I can change it back to you afterwards. Okay. Right.
Shall just add the waiting room at the moment because.
Yeah.
But don't make people wait too long, otherwise they might leave.
No, not the. Yeah, no, I won't do that. But at least you should know.
Are you sure you want to record this part?
Huh?
You're recording it right now as well. Do you want to record the call right now?
Yeah.
It's easier to cut off then.
Okay. Why is St. Bennett's Hall trying to join us? Okay, so Big T, do you want to put like in the background at the start, like maybe just the cover photo of the event or something while people come on? So if you want to share your screen and put that on.
Me?
Well, because I'm going to leave after this. You're going to be the host.
Right.
Get it up on your screen and then I'll show you how to share it.
I'm sharing my screen. Wait a second. You have disabled screen sharing, bro.
Oh, okay. Right, okay. You should be able to do it now.
Okay.
Also, are you going to do like audience questions and things?
We're
Yeah.
planning to, yeah.
Okay. Do you know how to use the raise hand features and things like that?
I looked at it. Yeah. Are you able to see my screen though?
So basically, if you want to, no, I can't see it.
Can you?
I've just raised my hand, T. Can you see that I raised it?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sean, can you see my screen by the way?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. We can see your screen now. Yeah. So if you want to click on the cover photo of the event.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
Tathagata, I'm able to see or read your personal messages.
Huh? Okay, let me do one thing. I'm short sharing first. Let me put that photo on.
Hi, T.
Sean, can you see my screen now?
No, I can't.
You know the link that we posted in the group chat?
Yeah.
Join with, right?
What did you say? Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Oh, we want people to join with that link. So,
If you want to.
oh, I mean, yeah, I'll just post this, and if it looks right,
Yeah. Just post it as the main.
Someone like add in. T, add in.
Only Big T can.
I will let
We know how
Adi
much-
in. Who sent pen at all? Is she Sushi?
Okay, just
Okay.
let them in and we'll see.
Yeah.
can everyone see what I just posted?
Who's saying at all?
Yeah. You can see it, yeah.
Okay, well, I have no idea where.
Okay.
The photo is not loading. No.
I can hear some kind of
Huh?
noise. Right?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Shall I let people in now, or?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Go ahead. Don't make them wait too long.
If you want, I can disable the waiting room, and then you don't need to click every time someone wants to go.
That's
in and
fine.
out.
Actually, I will know that who's coming in. I mean, you know.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna send it to you.
Okay. Shown us how to set that photo here.
So if you've got the photo up on your screen.
I've got the photo up
Okay,
on
then
Facebook.
you press share screen. Okay, press share screen then. And then you put your desktop as like You want to share whatever you're seeing?
Yeah, I shared it. Are you able to see it?
Okay, loading. Hopefully it works. I think your internet is quite.
Yeah, it's quite
bad.
bad.
Yeah, see if you can make it like. You see that button in the top right of the photo? Yeah, press that.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that's it, right?
Yeah. Okay, that should be good. Yeah. And then I guess when everyone comes on,
And I
you
can
can
stop sharing. Yeah.
stop sharing your screen. You might want to explain to people that later on they'll have a chance to ask questions. So keep your mics muted for now. And yeah.
Can't we mute them?
Did you know how to use the raise hand thing?
I mean, we can mute the participants from here, right?
Yeah, I think you can mute manually.
How do you do the raise hands thing?
So basically, people can. You need to tell people that when you want to, that they can raise their hands by pressing participants, and then there's a button that says raise hands. So if anyone tries that now, let's see if Big T can see that.
Okay, I'm trying it. Yeah, it happened.
Yeah.
Okay, you can see it. Okay, so you need to say that just if people press raise hand, then you choose someone, call out their name, and then they can unmute themselves or turn off their camera and ask the question.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll start in 2 more minutes, I guess. We should wait for 5 minutes or something.
Did you disable the waiting room, by the way? Because that might be a good idea now that a lot of people are going to join.
Yeah, I'm doing that.
Okay.
Right. Everybody can see this photo, right?
Yeah.
Okay, do you need any other help, or can I go now?
Yeah, I'm good, bro. You're leaving, right?
Okay. Yeah, unfortunately, I've got to now. But good luck with the talk. Then.
Thanks, mate.
Yep.
Shall we start the talk or wait for 5 minutes?
I think let's wait for like 2-3 minutes. It's not even 9:30 yet. I mean, like 5 p.m. yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll just wait for 2 minutes and we'll start.
We set it so that when people join, it's on mute.
Okay, so
Sagar, are you letting people in?
yeah, man.
Okay, I think just disable the waiting room.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, I disabled it. I'll do it. So, Kanika, I'm starting with the introduction, by the way. And you know the questions, right?
Okay, is Dravida Thiagarajan on the call?
Huh?
Dravida Thiagarajan on the call?
Is he?
Hey, I mean, sorry. You guys can start whenever you want. Sorry. You want me to turn on my video?
Yes, so we can start.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Okay, so Bhagat, I think we can start.
Yes, sir. Okay. Hello, sir, and welcome to the HAMSOC virtual interview series. And for a flagship event, we've invited a dignitary. The journey is not inspiring, but also a flag bearer for those who tend to forget or clutter the family legacy. Our guest speaker is none other than Dr. PTR Palanivel Thiagarajan, who started his career from NIT Trichy to University of Buffalo, and then leading to MIT's Sloan School of Business. Since 2016, he has joined politics. He has entered politics and followed his family legacy, and currently he serves as a member of Legislative Assembly of Madurai Central Constituency in Tamil Nadu. And without any further ado, please join us in welcoming Dr. PTR Palanivel Thiagarajan, sir. First of all, sir, we're very grateful for you that you took out some time from your 10-year schedule. And I want to convey my thanks to Dharani Dharan and Ruben for making this talk possible.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Every chance I get, I say that I feel like I'm a lifelong student after spending many years in many campuses. So I'm always happy to get back to speaking to students. I caution you, sometimes I get a bit kind of back in my old mode of lecturer, professor. My answers may be a bit long. If I'm going too long, cut me off to come back.
Nonsense, right?
Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. And before we started talking about the Indian economy, we thought that we'd get to know you a little better. So we just want to ask you, obviously you worked at Standard Chartered and Lehman Brothers. So what made you decide to switch back from investment banking to politics?
Actually, I'm an only child, and I'm the fourth generation of my family in the kind of Dravidian philosophy and public service. So this was always my destiny. Most people do it as a career. I tried my best to do other things. I spent 30 years studying, being a consultant, being a trader on Wall Street, being a banker. And then when I ran out of excuses, I came back. So I was always going to do this. I just tried to push it off as long as possible, and I couldn't do it anymore. So I'm back.
Right, sir. So to begin with, how do you think the migrant worker crisis will impact the economy in the long run?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of research on the numbers, and it's a bit confusing to me.
Right,
so as a member of the Assembly and a member of the Public Accounts Committee, I get to ask the government a lot of questions. And the Labour Department says that Tamil Nadu has only about 600,000 out-of-state migrant workers, 6 lakh as we say. That seems way too low for me. So I've been going and reading up a bunch of stuff. There's all kinds of data. The 2001 census put the number of migrants at 307 million, the 2011 at 454. But we all agree that the bulk of migrants are intra-state and in fact intra-district, within a district, and seasonal. They go based on the crop cycles and based on when there's no work or income in the villages. But in any event, I'd be hard pressed to assume the number is less than 60 million, and it must be somewhere north. I mean, it must be cannot be it should be in the range 40 to 60 million. That's my view. If that's the case, that's a huge chunk of our economy. You know, out of a 1.3 billion population, you take out the youth, you take out the aged people, you take out those who are incapable of work and all that. If Tamil Nadu is an indicator, out of 75 million people, only about 3.5 crores, so about 35 million are in the workforce. Right. So if that's an indicator around the country, we're looking at about 500 or 600 million people in the workforce. And, you know, for that number, 10% or so is a big number. And it's not just that, it's that they do the work that nobody else does. So, you know, in Tamil Nadu, construction, the textile businesses in Tirupur, export-oriented, massive businesses, the hotel businesses, the tourism industry, the transport, logistics, all of these run on migrant labor. So, you know, it's a crucial component of the economy, and I'm hard-pressed to think of this as settling anytime soon. A lot of this has to do with the psychology of the individuals, the lack of poor communication from the government, the repeated extensions of the lockdown, the lack of support during the lockdown. And I fear that we are now kind of reaping what we sowed in the early days, where now people want to go back, irrespective of the fact that, you know, the governments are now trying to give them incentives to stay and all these things. So my own view, it's 3 to 6 months before they all get back home. Okay. In the Supreme Court yesterday, the advocate for the Migrant Worker Association said in his estimation, given the current rate at which the government is providing supports for everybody to get home, then you ask yourself, if you had gone through this kind of trauma, would you come back? Of course, at some point, there's an economic kind of equilibrium that requires them to come back because they don't have incomes where they are. And the students are not that well off that they can do a lot of social spending. But all in all, my best guess, if I was to aggregate this, I say somewhere around 10% of the population of all workers is, and I fear this will have massive consequences on productivity, output, and GDP.
Yeah. Also, I think there have been a lot of reported cases amongst the migrant workers. So is the Tamil Nadu government doing anything specific to handle that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think I try not to get outraged, but as a professional, as an ex-consultant, as an operations research major, where I studied kind of logistics and systems optimization, it boggles the mind that the railways that otherwise run thousands of trains a day, with stops, with you know, breakdowns, with whatever, a system that can work with that complexity, how they are finding it difficult to get, you know, tens of trains, point A to point B, without any stops and without any complexity. So I don't understand what's happening. You know, I'm really confused about how the central government is not taking a pivotal role in this. I am as ardent a federalist as you'll ever find in India. I say that most of the power should be devolved to the states and in fact to the local bodies. We can go into that later. But I will be the first guy to say that intrastate travel, intrastate trains should be coordinated by the central government. We just don't have the capacity to do it. So the way that we do it right now, I spoke to the Secretary of the Labor Department, is that we have these websites where people come and register saying, I want to go or I want to come. And then each state crosses the data with the state of the receiving or the sending part. And then you get like a NOC and you get some approval and you issue some token numbers and all this stuff. This kind of state-to-state coordination is ridiculous. There should have been a national database. There should have been one-stop shop for everybody. And the central computerized system should have said, where are you calling from and where do you want to get to? And done all of this matching by itself. So, you know, yes, the government says we're doing things. My own constituency of Madurai, we have a fairly sophisticated collector. He's a medical doctor. And the assistant collector in charge of this is an IIM Bangalore graduate. She has done a pretty good job of identifying, supporting, providing them food and water for the journey and stuff. But you see, you start with a plan. You say that the train from, let's say, Delhi, from Vasi in Maharashtra to Gorakhpur should take about a day and a half. And what you're finding is these trains end up taking 3.5, 4 days going to 4 states or 5 states. So then you have no way of providing food for 4 days or 5 days that won't get spoiled, and there's no plan, and and certainly water, you cannot provide gallons and gallons of water per head. Even the containment of that is a problem. So it's a shameful episode in India's history. If I say too much, I'd be accused of politicizing it. But I just say it as a professional, that all of us in public service, irrespective of whether we're ruling party or opposition, one faith or the other, we should see this as a failure of democracy, a failure of governance, a failure of administration. It is a kind of black mark on the progress of our country, on the soul of our country, actually.
Obviously, so it's time consuming as well, because the trains and the NOCs, it takes lots of time to governments, and the laborers are kept waiting at railway stations. So is there any solution for it, or you think, this episode would go in?
Yeah, I think it supposedly gets easier over time, right? For multiple reasons. It gets easier over time because people figure out the flaws in the system and try to fix them. It gets easier over time because, what can I say, word of mouth propagates down the chain about what is and isn't the reality, and the human communication network. Luckily, mobile communications are very cheap and ubiquitous in India. So everybody can tell everybody else, up and down the chain, what is happening, how it's happening. Information travels very rapidly. Assuming that they finally get it right, I suppose it goes smoothly. But we have kind of a couple of variables that make it nightmare, in the sense that even in the evidence given in the Supreme Court yesterday during the hearing, the number of people that have gone back, that have been repatriated, is somewhere around 30, 40 lakhs, maybe 50 lakhs. Let's start with somewhere between 4 and 6 crore people, and let's say that 60% of them want to go back. You're looking at a huge number. And if you increase the number of trains, you increase the conflict of usage of the tracks and switching points and stuff like that. If you increase the number of trains, you increase the risk of accidents. So, in theory, lockdown 4.0 ends in 2 days. If that happens and they say, okay, normal trains start running for normal kind of business and personal reasons, then that further complicates the problem. So, as with all things, if you do it right the first time, or you take time to think about it, and you kind of, this old adages all come back to me about, measure multiple times and cut once kind of stuff. One, but it's hard. What worries me a lot is the attitude. Those of us who, we all fail. Nobody's perfect. We fail. Those of us who want to improve first have to admit that we failed. First have to admit that something went wrong. Then we start kind of, analyzing, looking for feedback, internal soul searching, external advice, and then we hope we get better. But if you're not admitting that what you have done has been kind of a failure, then it's very hard for you to improve. And so that is my bigger kind of long-term worry, is that neither of these governments at the state, in my state or in the center, are acknowledging. Now you can say, of course, it's politics. Nobody wants to admit they've done mistakes. What's happening in your country about the Prime Minister and his advisor, but it's not, what can I say, conducive to fixing. So I am genuinely concerned. I don't see, without the proper attitude, in fact, I've tweeted about this. I said, shouldn't the railways minister, who is whatever else he is or isn't, he's an auditor, he's a chartered accountant by profession. Surely he should get the best minds possible and run an immediate audit of what has happened. Why has this happened? And, these are not complex problems to analyze and fix. They may, however complex they are to fix, surely they're not complex to analyze what has happened already, because it's few hundred. I'm a bit, they're not doing that.
Yeah. Also, you mentioned how the lockdown 4.0 is going to end in 2 days. So do you think the economy is going to go back to normal after that? Or how long is it going to take? Or what do you think the future for the next few months is going to look like?
Yeah, you know, I don't want to sound like a pessimist, but let me start. The data came out this evening about 3 hours ago. I don't know if you guys were keeping up with it, but the Q4 of the fiscal year 1920 that ended March 31st, the data has come out, and we must keep in mind that that quarter or the year 1920 was pretty much COVID-free, because the first time the government acknowledged something was a problem was the 23rd, and the first lockdown 1.0 started on the 24th. So 7 days out of a 365-day year. So if you assume that was pretty much normal year, then we were already in pretty deep trouble. And depending on how many of you care about this, or if you've not already read it, I don't want to be repetitive, but I can go into a more detailed analysis. But the headline figures were that growth came in at 3.1% for the year in real terms. Now that is the lowest number in decades. And the government's finances are a big mess. The fiscal deficit came in at 4.6%, which, as everybody has written about and analyzed, this is not a good number because it already has a lot of off-balance sheet debt hidden in the balance sheet of Food Corporation of India and liquidation of net reserves in ONGC and so forth. But even taking it on surface value, the target under the FRBM Act is 3%. So they've overshot that target by 4.6%. Even that wouldn't worry so much, except that 4.6% fiscal deficit actually has the bulk of it. 3.3% is a revenue deficit. That means for current spending, that means through the shortfall of revenues compared to their intended goals, but not being able to cut back the spending. The revenue deficit for last year is 3.3%, which means that you have done almost no investment. Now, let's just remember, just for those who haven't got the structure, the FRBM Act and the equivalent acts, like in Tamil Nadu, we call it the FRA Act, Fiscal Responsibility Act. The targets are 0% revenue deficit. Don't spend today what you don't earn, and 3% maximum fiscal deficit. So ideally, keep all of your current expenses within your current income, borrow 3% of your GDP, and invest that all towards capital expenses. That's why 0 revenue deficit, 3% fiscal deficit. But last year has been 3.3% of the 4.6% was just revenue deficit, which means that the investment was less than half of target. It's 1.3%, not even 1.5%. It should have been up to 3%. So you know that growth is going to slow if you don't build infrastructure. And let's be very clear. The government is the single biggest driver of growth in capital spending, because the kind of projects the government does are multiplier effect. They put in drinking water systems, they put in roads, they put in ports, they put in hospitals. And they borrow at the lowest possible cost because it's the government, risk-free within our country according to the financial models. And therefore, they are more likely to get greatest return because they don't have to worry about bureaucrats, red tape, corruption. It's a government project. So any government capital investment is the lowest cost, lowest risk, highest return project. And if you build the roads and the industrial estates and the ports and the airports and the kind of infrastructure, electricity plants, then industry will come, then growth will come, then transport will come, then logistics will come. So this is the model. And if you find that government investment goes down, then you really worry about whether private investment will follow. I don't want to get too technical, but if you look at private capital formation and all that, was actually negative. So these are correlated things. Why I say this is, before this crisis ever touched us, we were already in the worst economic situation, at least in my lifetime, potentially since independence, in terms of not just were we down, but this was a demand problem. Normally in a developing economy, you have a supply problem. You have a lack of capital, you have a lack of investment, you have a lack of kind of, employment opportunities, but the demand is always there. At least at the bottom of the pyramid, people who are here have moved here, so forth. So, you never ever see declines in sales of fast-moving consumer goods, soap, toothpaste, biscuits, rice, things like that. This year, the finished year, we saw for the first time, those goods declined, or those goods growth slowed to almost 0. So, I don't know what to say. I don't see very great prospects, not just because of the crisis and the fact that the labor market is going to be disrupted for a while. But more so, I'm worried that we were weak going in. The balance sheet of the government was weak. The balance sheet of the banks were weak, as you know. And the trajectory was not going in the right direction. So it's not clear to me, unless there's some kind of structural change that so far I have not heard. My view is pessimistic enough that I don't want to share any more with you. Let's put it that way.
And sir, obviously the package that government has introduced, the 20 lakh crore one, what's your take on it? Is it good for the economy, or will it do any benefits?
Yeah, listen, my own view is that you cannot, and I'll get into a bit of this here if you don't mind, because you're all young enough that you can probably learn something from it. So, first, no other country in the world that I know mixes up the kind of monetary package and the fiscal package together. If you look at places like the US, when they say 2 trillion, they mean that is the government spending of foregoing taxes or reverse tax, putting minimum refunds into people's bank accounts. They don't talk about what the Federal Reserve does. That's a separate number. They don't put these two numbers together. This 20 lakh is the most unusual accounting I've seen in the world, where they put RBI's liquidity plus the government's loan guarantee plus the actual spending, all of it together. So you have kind of contingent liability, which the government says it's going to take, but the banks have to be the front line to advance those several crores worth of loans, which I have not seen them start yet. So overall, I would say this package, the chances of this package having a significant impact on growth prospects of the economy in the short term are pretty close to zero. And I don't think you'll find anybody else who would say different. I have here, I'm sure you've seen this. This is the 14 banks that have analyzed crore, or 10% of GDP. And this is global banks like Bank of America, Merrill, UBS, Deutsche Bank, Morgan Stanley, HSBC, Citibank, and Nomura, and Indian banks like Motilal Oswal, Kotak, etc. All of them together averaged out to 1% of GDP, or 2 lakh crores. So I think that's kind of not really going to move the needle. But I have a different point here, and that point is not related to India alone. It's related to the UK, the US, Europe, all of it. As somebody who has seen crises up close since I was at Lehman during the global financial crisis and running 2 of its subsidiaries, and as somebody who was in the Twin Towers when the 9/11 happened, and so I have some personal memories of how that evolved and how the market reacted and how system shut down and came back. I always worried that this was going to be much worse than that. But I also have this different kind of secular concern that the whole role of monetary policy has changed over the last 25 years or so, starting with Alan Greenspan period at the Fed in the US. In fact, you can even go back to the Japanese inventing the concept of quantitative easing. For those of you, you may not remember, but there was no concept like quantitative easing in economic theory or monetary policy till the mid-90s, when the Japanese central bank came up with the notion. So, in this whole transition, I feel like monetary policy has become completely useless at actually stimulating economic activity. Its entire purpose is in keeping stock market valuations and kind of bond market, liquidity from getting worse. And it's amazing because the argument is always pro-rich and pro-inequality. And I'm saying that as an ex-Wall Street banker. I'm saying when the markets crash, the Fed pumps in trillions, the Bank of England pumps in trillions, the ECB pumps in billions or hundreds of billions. Maybe the Bank of England also can only afford billions, not trillions. And what happens? They say, if we let the markets crash, if we let liquidity dry up, if we let the money market stall, we will create untold misery. No problem, agreed. But what happens after that? Because the world has become so global and because these banks cannot control where that liquidity actually goes, That liquidity does not go into what they think it should go into, which is to build new factories, create new companies, set up jobs, do all that. Or, these companies to do that. What it goes into is flight of capital to whichever part of the world they can buy assets, driving up asset prices all over the world, and not creating employment or GDP or productivity. So in good times, they're not able to pull it back. So if you really look at it, 2008 was the bottom. 2008 was the beginning of the crash. Let's say by 2010, 11, the world started to correct. By 2013, when Ben Bernanke says, I'm thinking of unwinding liquidity, the markets start to tank. The FX market go haywire. All the asset prices fall. All of a sudden, they find their hands are tied. So now we have perpetually about $2 trillion of excess liquidity because they can't unwind the GFC. Now we fast forward another 5 or 6 years, we have another major crisis. This time they're pumping in $4 trillion of extra liquidity. What does this do? It just keeps the rich richer and it keeps the poor unemployed. So in my view, this whole kind of 15-year period has shown the depth of monetary policy. All the monetary policy can do is keep the rich rich. It is incapable of actually stimulating growth or fixing the economy, is what I would take out of this experience.
I had a macroeconomics exam recently, so that was actually really interesting to listen to. But before we move on to the Q&A by the audience, we have one last question. So after the coronavirus crisis, what do you think India's role is going to be in the economy? Because obviously there's a lot of war happening between many countries and China, like a kind of Cold War. And many people are saying that production might be moving to India, or many countries might be looking at being self-sufficient. So what do you think is going to be India's role in this new world?
Yeah, I think this is a very complex question. There was a time when I was a global banker, when I was a Stanchart, I ran the global money markets and the global foreign exchange on the back of commercial banking. So I track the global economy and trade flows and things a lot better. I don't so much anymore because I'm an MLA and I worry about, clogged sewers and drinking water pipelines. But in the last few days, I've read probably 2 or 3 or listened to 2 or 3 really interesting conference calls and read articles, which just confuses me. I just earlier today, I was at an event moderated by M.K. Narayan, the former National Security Advisor of India, and had somebody from the Brookings Institution, Washington, D.C., a old China hand from the press, James Crabtree, ex of the Financial Times, now in Singapore at the Lee Kuan Yew School, and Vijay Gokhale, former Foreign Secretary of India. And there was no consensus at all. I don't see what, of course, it's hard to say. This whole thing is pivoted on what happens to US-China relations and how bad do they get, and what are the consequences. And nobody can really see that. Among other things, there's an election also in the US coming, so it's hard to see what happens beyond that. But if you leave out the kind of likelihood of another Cold War, and you leave out the kind of extreme case scenarios of many border wars and things like that, which I can't calculate. I'm not qualified enough, and I'm not enough of a geopolitical kind of strategist to answer those questions. But assuming that we don't get to a situation where there's military escalation, and it's only a question of trade and deglobalization and so forth, then I think we must assume that whatever personal incentives and economic rationale for profit seeking by individuals led to China going to the place it is, where it's the manufacturing hub and the integral component of the supply chain of the world, cannot be kind of disrupted that easily. I've been on programs in India where I say, I don't think it's that easy. I don't think that, all of a sudden 20% of the offshoring that goes into China suddenly shuts down and moves out. Nobody else has the scale. Nobody else has the logistical sophistication. Nobody else can take up the slack. Right? China is the behemoth. And were it to move, it's not clear to me how much of that would come to India. We have serious structural problems in India, and if anything, this crisis has highlighted the lack of our independence of our judiciary, the lack of ability to get rapid resolution, the illiquidity in the bond market and the mutual fund market, where the RBI has had to step in and kind of support those. The limitations of regulation in the financial markets. So it's not clear to me we have covered ourselves in glory enough that the trade away from China moves towards us. But even let's say that's true. Let's say that I'm a pessimist. Let's say that China is going to lose a bunch of stuff, and let's say that's going to come to India in a significant way. That's like a 2-year or 2.5-year pipeline. I mean, think about doing business in India. Think about acquiring land. Think about building factories or setting up power plants or setting up infrastructure and things like that. These are not things that will result in significant kind of employment or growth opportunities in the next 3 months, 6 months, is my understanding. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that things, really go our way. But neither is China likely to lose as much as we think it is, nor are we likely to gain as much. The one other guy I follow is the New York NYU economics professor, Rubini, who has put out a very interesting interview where he says he thinks there'll be some kind of a short-term revival before a long-term secular recession lasting 10 years. And he says by the end of 10 years, then all these systems will be reset to a different equilibrium. Workers will get back to earning. It'll be like the period between the post-war to the 70s, where there was this golden age where growth was driven with increased equality, with increased uplift of the middle class and lower middle class, with increased kind of workers' rights and things like that. Yeah, I hope that we get those outcomes. I'm not sure of the time frame, but I will say that we must assume that something is structurally wrong, and this was wrong before we ever got into this crisis. For those of you who are studying economics, as you said you were, you can quantitatively show, as you know, that deregulating trade, that opening up and freeing up trade, almost always will result in greater global output. It's a good thing for overall productivity and global GDP. What it does not tell you is who gets the benefit of that upside. How much of it goes to country A versus country B, and within country A, whether it goes to the working classes or the investors, and within country B, where it goes. And so what we have seen is that all of the trends of the last kind of 20, 30 years have actually resulted in huge increases in inequality in most of the developed world, especially in the US, in the UK, places like that. We have seen the backlash to that being the kind of right-wing populism and the anti-globalization protests and votes that you see. And in places like India, it has not, at least not uniformly, reduced inequality. In places like Tamil Nadu, inequality is a lot less. In places like Gujarat, it's a lot more. But across India, while globalization has moved the average up a lot, while opening up the economy after the 90 crisis has moved us up a lot, while the overall growth rate of India has moved up a lot, the impact on inequality has been very different across different parts of the country. And I think that is the structural problem we have, because if I was to make it kind of very rudimentary, the role of government in a democracy is to ensure that everybody has a chance to grow under a rule of law without threat of violence or crime or breakdown of the social fabric. And you do that by providing for the weakest, by having some level of fairness, by taking from the rich, otherwise you don't get revenue, and by providing good public goods and services like safe and clean drinking water and healthcare system and so forth. And you keep everybody close enough together that nobody feels left out and wants to start a revolution. I mean, that is very, very crudely put. And I think many of those things were starting to fray even in the developed economies, where you're seeing the kind of rancid politics that you didn't see for decades, very extreme on either side. And, I worry that this crisis will kind of exacerbate that in some places rather than collapse it. Of course, if it goes on long enough, all things kind of reset to some equilibrium. But it's not clear to me which effect comes first. And Rubini says one other thing. He says, if you have deglobalization, and if you have places like the US where they pull back a lot of manufacturing, that might not necessarily lead to a greater increase in, or a greater employment. These days, the mechanization and automation effects have gotten so good, especially with what they call, kind of somewhat crudely, the Industrial Revolution 4.0, where you can automate with huge dexterity built into the last mile, the robots, with great complexity in the logistical controllers. You can actually run whole factories with about 1/3 or 1/4. I used to be an industrial consultant. I used to go out on shop floors. You don't need that anymore. You can run whole manufacturing industries with about 1/4 of the workforce you needed as recently as 30 years ago. So again, it's not clear to me that deglobalization, which certainly some amount of deglobalization is going to happen. And it won't be the first time. I hope you all look back enough to know that there have been many cycles of hyper-globalization and pullback, right? The Roman Empire, the British colonial days, or the European colonial days, was a much more globalized economy, and then, different things pulled it back. So the deglobalization was probably overdue time-wise and is definitely going to happen to some extent. The question is, in the past, globalization was only about the movement of goods and capital. Maybe to some extent labor, but much of it was slave labor. It was not intentional labor. Now you have movement of everything, right? You can send information, you have unlimited movement of capital, even the central banks can control where it goes. You have very high levels of labor migration across countries, illegal and legal, and almost intellectual property. Anything can move across any border. So how much can you really cut that back? It's hard to say. And I've given a lecture in the past, just as a last point, that we know that globalization is way beyond anybody's understanding, because what should have been a US mortgage and securitization and bank balance sheet crisis became a global financial crisis in 2008, purely because of globalization, purely because that risk had been shed without the regulators realizing to places like IKB in Germany and the Bank of China and BNP Paribas and all these places, who through total return swaps and other derivatives and contracts that nobody knew existed because they're OTC contracts, not registered anywhere. The risk had been shifted all over the world. That has not changed. If you look at what happened after 2008-9, after the big OECD banks started pumping in liquidity, between 8, 9, and 13, they pumped in $4 trillion of excess liquidity. 3 trillion of that ended up in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. It didn't stay in the US and Europe and ECB and Japan where it was pumped out. It came buying assets and in much smaller doses doing investments of real greenfield project, brownfield projects in the emerging markets. So, globalization has become kind of a multi-headed monster that I don't think anybody can control. Of course, it'll pull back, but how much remains to be seen.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable insight. And now moving on to the last segment of our interview, questions from the audience. Anybody who wants to pose questions can raise hands in it with the icon, with the Zoom icon, or message me if you want, if you're not able to find the icon.
I think someone sent a message.
Yeah.
Hariharan.
Yes. Shall we read out? Shall you? Yeah. Go ahead. Shall I do it or? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
He's saying, would like to hear your inputs on Geo's inlays of investment. Is there any reading between lines which general audience out here could be missing? Also, would like to hear your views more about failure or recent free fall in investors like SoftBank, Ventura, and Lightspeed's balance sheets. What would be its impact on future of startup ecosystem in India? Can government do something about this to regulate vision funds more?
Yeah, I think those are all slightly different and highly complex questions. So I'm not sure I'm still qualified to answer them in any depth. But my initial thoughts, the investments into Geo reflect two things. One, the future growth opportunities, which is, they would have done this any day of the year, but Mr. Ambani didn't need the money till now. So that's That's the two halves of the equation. Any day that he had offered up the shares, I think the people who bought it would have bought it. He didn't need the money till now, and now he needs the money because he needs to deleverage a bit as well. So I think it's just it's a transaction like going back to the Adam Smith notion that each man acting in his own interest sometimes provides the right outcome for society, unregulated and unkind of checked. As far as the soft banks and so forth of the world, listen, the whole the whole business of finance is a confidence game. I'm not even saying in a bad way. I'm saying that's what finance is. The whole notion of finance, investment, returns, etc., is a psychology and perception business. Just go back to the basic macroeconomic equation, right? So if all savings effectively have to get moved to either industrial borrowings or capital investments or government borrowings, and if the GDP of the world keeps growing and the wealth of the world keeps growing and therefore the savings keep growing, perpetually the wealth of the world goes up, perpetually the amount of financial securities issued to absorb this wealth and put it to work keep going up. So stock market valuations, the total outstanding bonds, the total outstanding commercial paper, the total outstanding corporate debt, government bonds, etc., all going up. Now the question is, if the number is perpetually going up, and there will never come a day when everybody wants to get out of the same market at the same time, it's not doable, you cannot liquidate the entire market, then everybody kind of is in a Ponzi scheme of some sort, whether you like it or not, because the only real exit for you is either you sell the stuff or you die and pass it on to your heirs. There's no other real exit out of investing into public securities or bonds or whatever. So in that sense, markets which run on confidence really used to have kind of a better check and balance before this whole notion of central bankers becoming like politicians and the line between the government and the central banks blurring. Now, it's like a safe bet. It's like, the Federal Reserve is the dealer in the casino. No matter what happens to the economy, the Federal Reserve will make sure the market doesn't crash, or the equivalent Bank of England and the ECB and the RBI and so forth. So here you have this dichotomy. I'm sure I still subscribe to The Economist, though I don't think it does such a good job anymore like it used to 20 years ago. And the cover story 3 or 4 weeks ago was this growing gap between the real economy and the market valuations. The real economy is going in the tank, and the market valuations of all securities, bonds, stocks, government debt, is going through the roof. And it's what we called in the market, we say technical. So fundamental is based on future cash flows, valuations, growth prospects, etc. Technical is simply supply and demand. You pump all this extra money into the system, the money has to go somewhere. And almost to validate this concept that is technical and it's a bubble growing again, I saw some data about 2-3 days ago. An old trader, a friend of mine from Lehman, who's now an investment advisor and a kind of show host, TV and radio show host, he put out, he retweeted some data that came out that showed that it shows where is the stimulus money going. So the federal government of the United States has been pumping out hundreds of billions of dollars in stimulus, and they've been giving each family checks for 3,000 upwards, going down, trickling down to 1,000 or something. Where is this money going? And except for the lowest income category, $35,000 or lower family, all the other income categories, one of the top 3 or 4 things that money was going into is the stock market. So now you have this like perverse outcome where the monetary policy is pumped by the Fed into keeping the stock market up, not crashing. And then individual investors are lured into this saying, oh, the rest of the economy is crap. I can't find any other real asset to buy. Why don't I go and buy some shares as well? So either this is a never unwinding perpetual Ponzi scheme, or if it's not, there's some serious pain to come. And it's not like it hasn't happened before. Just point you to the Japanese stock market, where in 1990 when it crashed, it had reached a high of something like 41,000 or 42,000, the Nikkei index. I don't remember exactly, it was so long ago. And after that, it reached a bottom of something like 10 or 12,000. And I don't think it's ever crossed like 25 or 28 since. This is now 30 years later. So don't assume that markets will never crash, but sometimes when they crash, they might take decades to recover. So I can't understand this widening gap. It's true in India. I've just told you that we're facing one of the worst economic outlooks that I can, in whatever intellectual capacity I have as a human being, I don't see how the Indian economy avoids a 6 to 8% real GDP recession this year. Stock market's up like 40% from its low, or 50% from its low, or higher. Stock market went up 900 points yesterday. I don't know what number it went up today. I mean, the Sensex index. I can't reconcile these things. I worry that it's not perpetually possible to separate truth from perception. And, you know, central banks can't keep writing these tickets forever. Maybe I'm wrong.
We have another question from Dhruva Bhatt. He says, very interesting talk. What are your points for bringing in equitable distribution of wealth? How can we force the government to do it?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's always hard. As I've spoken many times before, just like entropy in the world goes on increasing, inequality is inherently going to keep on increasing. Unless you have dramatic government policies, sometimes dramatic, sometimes extreme, but focused and driven government policies, the natural outcome is that you will find wealth keeps on increasing and income keeps on, the inequality of wealth and income keeps increasing. The lesson I would point to is you take a place like Tamil Nadu. Let's just compare 3 states. Let's take Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Gujarat. These are all states within the same country. Or let's take 4 states actually. Bihar, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. All within the same country. And at independence, you know, in many indicators, from health indicators to social development to education to GDP to everything, they were not that far apart. Maybe 1:1.5 or 1:1.25. No measure were we 1:2 or worse. Now, if you start comparing the states, I'll give you the extreme examples. If you take Bihar, it is dirt poor by Indian standards. Per capita income is something like 35 or 40,000 rupees as opposed to the country's average of 1 lakh. Average education is elementary school dropout. Birth rate is very high. Total fertility rate is something like 3.4 or 3.5 births per woman. Therefore, the age is very low. Average age is something like 19. And the chance of a college age kid going to college, enrolling in college, or what we call GER, gross enrollment ratio in higher education, is somewhere around 12%. 1 in 8 go to college. Now I come to Tamil Nadu, which is the starkest contrast. Capita income is over 2 lakh rupees. The total fertility rate is 1.6. Their age is something like 31. The average education is high school graduate. And the gross enrollment ratio into college is 48 or 49%. It's higher than the UK, it's higher than the US. 1 in 2 kids enrolls in college. Now you can say, some of these colleges are not great colleges, the degrees are not leading to jobs. I have no problem. I won't argue any of that. But the fact is the GER is that high. Now you move to Kerala. Kerala in some ways is better than Tamil Nadu in some indicators. Infant mortality is lower. I mean, an infant mortality in Bihar is about 2.5 to 3 times per thousand what it is in Tamil Nadu. Kerala is even lower than Tamil Nadu. But Kerala has 2-3 distinctions compared to Tamil Nadu. Kerala has not nearly as good infrastructure, not nearly as good medical facilities, not nearly enough education institutions, not nearly the gross enrollment ratio we have. It's about 32%. 32% compared to 48% or 34%, something like that. And the Indian average is something like 24%. Right? So Bihar is half the Indian average, but double the Indian average. So, but Kerala has one thing that is much better than us. Kerala has much more evolved local self-government. The power of a panchayat chairman or a councillor in Kerala is akin to being a minister in Tamil Nadu. In their local areas, they are very powerful because of the history of the Communist Party and the Communist governments in the past. Now, I could say the downside is that if they weren't getting billions of dollars a year of remittances from the Gulf, they couldn't keep up and they wouldn't have some of the outcomes. They would say, listen, we are still the best handling of all states in the COVID epidemic. We have the greatest kind of health indicators in infant mortality even before the disease struck. So that's a trade-off we are willing to take. Now you go to Gujarat. Gujarat has galloped in industrial development, particularly the last few years between 2006 and 2016. Gujarat's share of India's total manufacturing went up by 2 or 3 percentage points. So it went from like 11 to something like that. And it is a very high per capita income state, perhaps not as high as Tamil Nadu, but not very far behind. But the difference between Gujarat and Tamil Nadu is Gujarat has about the highest Gini coefficient in India, the highest spread of wealth between poorest and richest, has about the lowest quality of medical treatment, has things like infant mortality not that far from the poor states, has access to education not that far from the poor states. So it is a much more unfair society. Now you say, how does this happen? And is this fixable in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years? And I say, it happens because of the philosophy of government, and it happens over decades. It cannot happen overnight. If you take the southern states as a whole, this supporting kind of infrastructure was driven by universal education, universal access, removal of the caste system, bringing everybody into the temple, all of these things which started in the 1920s by the Justice Party under diarchy, even in the British days, in the kind of Madras presidency. That was the foundation. So compulsory education for girls and the right to vote for women in 1920, before it was done in England. So we were a society focused on this kind of inclusive, what we now call inclusive growth, or education-driven growth. We started 100 years ago. So we see the consequences of that. So I think the way you look at this is to say, you must start with the specific goal that as much as you want growth, equal weight must be given to the notion that you want equality. Maybe not equality in outcome, but sometimes you have to do brutally equality in outcome. For example, the Justice Party government said, we are finding that all the lucrative jobs, in those days, all the lucrative jobs were government jobs, British government jobs. The Munsif, district collector, whatever, assistant collector, court judge, this, that. So all these jobs are taking, they're 30% of the population, and they have 70 to 90% of these jobs. So we're going to bring in a new regulation. Say from now on, intake says, if your community is X percentage of the population, X percentage of the jobs are reserved for you. If you're Y, Y. Now that is brutal. It is highly inefficient on the day you start that, because there's no way these people, you just started compulsory education now. There's no way these people are as qualified as the people you're going to stop from getting the jobs because they're in a category whose quota has been used up. But you take that pain, you take the cost, you say for this generation or for this 3 years or for this 10 years, I will take that cost, because what it will do is provide an example to look up to, a pathway to progress, somebody to provide guidance, so that every community has a judge, every community has a collector, every community has a doctor. For example, again, in 1926 or so, 22 or so, the Justice Party government eliminated the Sanskrit fluency prerequisite for entering medical college. Till then, if you needed to enter medical college, you had to have Sanskrit fluency. So why is this related to medicine? And the debate, just to tell you how sometimes these debates get farcical, the opponent said, no, you can't take it away. So the chief minister at the time, the Raja Panakal, he said, no problem, I won't take it away. You just show me the library of books for medicine written in Sanskrit, not available in any other language, and we'll retain the requirement. If not, we're going to throw it out. We threw it out. Tamil Nadu has the highest, number of doctors per 1,000 people in the country, and the highest number of medical college seats for government colleges, and the overall access to healthcare. So you start 100 years ago, you get that result today. So my point is, equality has to be built into your governing philosophy, has to be a conscious goal. Sometimes you can do it easily, sometimes you have to do it brutally, sometimes you have to do it against a lot of opposition. But if you don't do it, you will see the disparate incomes that you see now. Outcomes that you see now.
Right. So there's next question from Celine George, if I get the pronunciation right.
Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Vanakkam and good evening, sir. So happy to see you talking to us. It's a very rare thing, of course. And my question is about the communication that we are not able to establish with Tamil Nadu government, or during this COVID, or in general. Something like a continuous communication is close to impossible. All the communication, whatever that we established throughout this time, or through a known context within the government. So here in the UK, I'm heading the Tamil Studies UK campaign to bring Tamil Studies in the University of London School of Oriental and African Studies. So we have been engaging conversations with Tamil Nadu government for last 2 years. So every time when we have a materialistic, something like a achievable communication is happening. So some local politics changes its dynamics. So maybe it's a 16-lane road or a Tuticorin issue or something like that. So this time it is COVID, and almost for last 4 months, we are not able to maintain an active communication with the government. So it's like we are not able to proceed with things. So even if we able to do communication with the ministerial level, the problem is the continuity and sustainability is not there. So there is no way we can talk. Actually,
no, my friend, I'm sorry. Yeah. I don't mean to cut you off. My point is, you and I can take this offline.
Okay. So, my point.
I don't want to use up other people's
My question is whether a DMK government coming back to power, will we have any roadmap laid to engage the diaspora? Because we are one of the largest diaspora in the United Kingdom. I'm not talking about Tamils as a whole in Indians. So is there any way we can engage active conversations with the state government, and does DMK have any plan laid out in future?
Yeah, listen, I'm not senior enough to speak for the party. I assume that every government wants to engage the diaspora. It's in our interest. People who have done it successfully, like Kerala, they get a lot more remittances, and so it's crucial to their kind of well-being. I don't think it's a lack of will. I don't want to politicize the issue. I'm sure it'll get done. It's not a questionable goal. It's a clear goal.
Okay.
It'll get. So we can have this offline. Please take my call.
Offline. Okay. Thank you very much, sir. Okay. Thank you.
So we have 2 more questions from Richa and Ruben, but we're kind of running out of time. Do you want to take those questions?
Sure. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So Richa is saying, so you spoke about the monetary problem in India keeping the rich rich. Relating to that, why is that the richest people in our country, the 2nd or 3rd generation tycoons who run huge empires comprising dozens of unrelated businesses, they create artificial barriers of access to regulators and thus deprive our startups of wealth generating opportunities? Is it just because they can navigate the Indian government maze? What is the root problem for this, and what does India need to do to change this and fuel innovation and startup culture? Why is it that in Western countries, innovation drives wealth, and that is not the case here?
Yeah, I think she's, I'm sorry, I didn't get the name. Who asked?
Richa.
Yeah, so I think she's answered the question to some extent herself. I'll just make 2 or 3 quick points. This is not an India-specific problem. My MIT senior, Raghu, who was the Reserve Bank Governor of India and before that the IMF Chief Economist, he and his Chicago colleague have written a book about it. It's called Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists. So this is, in a democracy, the real risk is that you start with a level playing field, and those who get so big and so successful use their money to lobby the democratic process to twist the rules towards them. And therefore, it's like we all storm the fort together. The one who gets in first then draws up the drawbridge so that the rest of you can't come in. So in that sense, this is a global problem. It's not an India problem. This notion of successful individuals or families or companies lobbying governments to change the rules to suit them and prevent competition. In India, it's particularly bad because it's not even widely shared. It's not even a company where other people can buy shares into it, and therefore that the wealth, even if it's misguidedly grown, Google is a monopoly, but it's owned by many people who also benefit from the growth. Reliance, maybe not so much. It is listed to some extent, but not so much. So in India, the unique problem is, as you say, the kind of disruption of normal processes through rent seeking and bad governance and bad policies and so forth. And in fact, when I was at Stanchart, my then colleague, though I was at the global level, our India economist wrote a beautiful piece, which I don't know if I can find, but if I will, I'll send it to you. But he said, you can tell the quality of an economy by the industries in which the billionaires made their money. You look at the industries in which they made the money. And if the industries are things like the tech industry or fast-moving consumer goods or stuff where there's intense competition and it's almost impossible to skew the government policies in your favor across all the states at the same time. If the billionaires come from that industry, then it's more likely the economy is a clean and well-run economy. If the billionaires come from industries like telecom, petroleum, all these kinds of heavily regulated industries, then it's more likely that it's a crony capitalist kind of country. And in fact, he went on to say that if that is the case in a country like India, effectively, all these industrialists are not in various businesses, they're in one business, and that business is government arbitrage. They know how to make the government work for them. So that's true. It's a very good indicator, and I urge you all to look at many countries that way. How do you overcome that? Well, in theory, the democratic process is supposed to kind of prevent this from happening. In theory, we are supposed to evolve as the per capita income goes up, where people demand their rights and so forth. So this wasn't any different if you take the US in the late 1800s, early 1900s, the robber barons and so forth, and Tammany Hall, how they rigged the whole democratic system to suit the rich and the crooked. But in practice in India, we seem to be regressing over the last few years. We find that it's becoming more and more kind of fewer and fewer people who are controlling more and more of the country. And places like Oxfam and other kind of economic analysts have shown the extent of concentration of wealth and power and assets. So I don't know. I worry that unless there's some kind of structural change in the system, it's hard to say. Nothing can perpetuate itself forever. India is a big country. It's hard to keep it pressed down. Once the system becomes unfair beyond a point, then I hope the forces of nature will kind of try and revert it. But I completely agree. I completely agree that the system is rigged and it's not new and it's not unique to India. It may be acute in India, but it's not new to. It's not unique to India. There are a lot of places in the world that's there. The extent to which you suppress it and the extent to which you allow social mobility, entrepreneurial success, and kind of equal odds for people is really the extent to which a democracy is successful and your growth rate is going to be high and your community is going to be calm. The more you kind of deviate from that path, you're heading to kind of unsustainable or volatile or socially disruptive conditions. That's just the long-term truth.
And the last question, sir. So it's Ruben says, sir, according to the current situation in the state of Tamil Nadu, there are more chances that your political party DMK will come to power in the next election. If you come to power, what are your plans to manage the challenges faced by the state? For example, water management, unemployment. And do you think interlinking of rivers is possible?
Yeah, listen, again, I don't, since I'm assuming this is recorded, a lot of people here, it's not my seniority to talk about what our ambitions are. Of course, some of them are long-term. Our philosophy is the same. We want to increase the, inclusiveness. We want to take care of the poor. We want to build better infrastructure. I have spoken extensively on the budget and how badly the state of the state's finances are and how they've been mismanaged only in the last 5-6 years. Even with Ms. Jayalalitha alive and in control, I didn't find that much fault with them. But after her incapacitation and then her demise, the finances have been really badly managed. So I can say for sure that we will try our best to repair the balance sheets, probably need to do structural kind of changes. We are beyond kind of incremental recovery from the hole that we're in. But I will say that, what worries me, and it's very rare for a politician to say this, but what worries me is not whether we'll win or not. I think it was a no-brainer before this crisis came, and I think mostly because nobody in Tamil Nadu is going to vote for somebody without personal charisma and to continue a regime for 3 years. They understand the risks of, uncontrolled corruption and kind of decay that have already set in. They're not going to allow that to continue. My worry is about what happens after we come to power, right? And I've said this in multiple places because I foresee the economy to be in much, much worse shape than it is today, which is already in much worse shape than it has been in decades. And even if my assessment of the migrant labor problem is pessimistic, and so they come back in 3 months or 6 months to normal, if let's just do this thought exercise. I told you June 30th, somebody warned, and the COVID, disappeared completely off the face of the country. How long do you think it would take to get back to a normal functioning economy after that? In my mind, it would take you a minimum of 3 months if you're really optimistic. Everything that was shut down has to start up again. People have to reverse migrate, come back, do all of this, or reverse migrate, original migrate. Then you have to get all the process that was shut down up and running. Then you have to open the trade routes and get everything going. So let's say that 3 months is realistic. So after 3 months, you get back to full production, which was already the worst economy that you had for 30, 40 years. Now you have lost about 3 to 6 months of downside, which means that even if you do straight line, let's say an economy grows 10% a year. That means over the next 12 months, it's growing. Last year's 100 plus 10, 110 divided by 12, which is, I don't know, 8.5%, 9% or 9.25%. You've lost 9.25 times 2. You haven't lost all of it. You've lost, let's say, half or 3/4 of it. Right there, you're in a recession. There's no way out. If you're in a recession, so let's take, for example, State Bank of India's numbers. State Bank of India estimates that next year, this year, that is the existing year, that 2021, the notional GDP will drop by about 3.5%. 3.5% in notional GDP drop, which is about, about 30 something lakh crores. Then they say you add real. Now we take the next step. 6.5% drop in real GDP, and the population is still going to grow by 3 to 3.5%. So just simple math without even the kind of multiplier divisor variation. You will say you're looking at 10% per capita GDP drop. If you're looking at 10% per capita GDP drop, surely that's not going to be spread equally from the top of the pyramid to the bottom. Mr. Ambani is going to get richer. Even somebody like me is probably going to, not suffer that much. So then you find the people at the bottom really are looking at minus 15%. If they go to minus 15% in their income this year compared to last year, that means there are many people who are not going to get enough to eat. So my worry is that it might be a poison chalice. Coming to power is not the biggest ambition a man can have, right? You want to be able to do good things. What happens if the economy has gone into such a tailspin and people are suffering and lack of nutrition, and they've dug us 6 feet in under, and now we got to start digging ourselves out? That's a 2-year process. It's if you're lucky 18 months, if you're unlucky 2-3 years. So it's going to be the hardest job that I've ever done in my life. And, it scares me. I'm just saying, even if I'm just an MLA, forget whether I'm a minister and what portfolio. So, I think the sooner we realize the extent of the complexity, what really frustrates me, doesn't want to open its mind, or somehow is in this false notion that they can kind of whitewash this stuff away, like by press management and media management, right? I can tell you, Tamil Nadu has the highest penetration of smartphones in the country, but that was not that different in 2019. In 2019 May, 60-65% of Tamil Nadu was on WhatsApp. Who owns the WhatsApp world? Surely the right wing in every country, including the BJP in Tamil Nadu. What happened to the vote share? They got 3% of the vote. We won with a 22.5% margin, which is the highest margin seen in 20 odd years since 1996. I'm not saying that this is any great pride for me. I'm saying what happens in the real world cannot be managed away owning the papers and the social media and the TV station. Just because they jump because you say so, the people are not stupid. If their lives are miserable, they know their lives are miserable. You can't calm them into thinking their lives are great. At least in a place like Tamil Nadu, where the average education is high school graduate. So At some level, what I worry about is that the entire notion of government, the notion of democracy, the notion of being calm and participating in the system is being damaged by getting egregiously bad outcomes by people who seem to think they're playing some kind of penny ante game when it's all in. You're going to kind of see consequences you've never seen before. But it is what it is. Maybe I'm being unduly pessimistic. Maybe it'll be better than that. I hope I am, of course. But we can reconvene next year this time and see what the world turned out to be.
Absolutely, sir. It will be an honor to have you again.
Yeah, maybe in person this time.
Yes.
With any luck. Yeah, I must say that I always wanted to get to Oxford at some point because my grandfather was a student there from 1912 to 1915. And one thing and another, though I had all these global jobs and traveled to 60 countries and was constantly in the air for decades, I never made it to Oxford till at Stanchart, they sent me to some kind of leadership development program for 2 weeks or something. I don't remember what it was, to the Said Business School. It was called something like Leading Across Boundaries. I forget what it was. But it was a very pleasant memory. I stayed at that, the prison converted to a hotel.
Yeah, the Malmaison.
Yeah, the Malmaison. And I went to the Jesus College Chapel and heard the choir and went to a bunch of pubs and contemplated what life must have been like in 1920 for a brown man in Oxford. So I have very fond memories. I've never been back since or been there before, but hopefully I'll get to come one day again.
Yes, sir. Of course.
Yeah, we'll get in touch with you next year once everything is back to normal, hopefully.
I look forward to that. Thank you.
Well, with this, we've come to the end of our interview. So we just wanted to thank you for taking the time to talk to us and our members. And I think I speak from everyone's side when I say that the talk was really enlightening and insightful. And we'd also like to wish you and the Tamil Nadu government all the best for handling this crisis. And we hope that you and your family stay safe and well. And it was really lovely getting to know you today.
Thank you, and thanks for all taking the time. Thanks for the opportunity, and I wish you all the best as well, because it's not like this disease is any less risky where you are. So please stay safe, stay isolated, and take care of yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
sir. Thank you, sir, for joining.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Guys, that's it. Thank you all for joining, and we hope to contribute to bring many more talks this session. And next talk would be on the music director, very famous music director, Roop Kumar Rathore. So stay tuned, stay safe, stay home. Thank you.